So let's dive a little deeper into photosynthesis and cellular respiration. First, let's look at photosynthesis. This is done by autotrophs. Autotrophs automatically make their own food. They produce their own food. So autotrophs and producers are the same things. Plants are always autotrophs. Some algae and some bacteria are as well. They make their own food. So the big idea about photosynthesis is that it traps light energy and changes it into chemical energy. Chemical energy is stored in the sugar molecule. The simplest form of sugar is glucose, and that's the one that your body and other plant and animal cells use in its life processes. Energy can actually be converted from one form to another. Solar energy from the sun is converted to chemical energy by photosynthesis, and then that chemical energy is converted to ATP energy by cellular respiration, which is the next thing we'll study. So let's look at the formula for photosynthesis. You must have light for photosynthesis to occur. That provides the energy that makes this reaction happen. You also have to take in carbon dioxide and water. Remember, we breathe out carbon dioxide, so plants take it in. And you have to water a plant every week. These are your reactants. Carbon dioxide and water. Sometimes light is considered a reactant. Sometimes it's considered what makes the reaction go. There's not really a formula for light energy because it is not a particle. It's actually a wave of energy. We're just going to put it on the reactant side because it must be there to start with to help produce the products. Then the plant produces sugar. It produces sugar as a useful product. That's what the plant uses for its food. And it produces oxygen as a waste product. It just gets rid of it. It doesn't want it. It can't use it, but we use the oxygen. And these are your products, glucose and oxygen. Glucose is the simplest form of sugar, and that is the type of sugar that your body will use, and it's the type that plants produce. Photosynthesis happens in the chloroplasts of leaves. Remember, a chloroplast looks like a bean with little stacks of coins connected by little lines. So those little coins are thylakoid membranes. And each of those has chlorophyll, which is the green pigment that helps trap the light. So chlorophyll is what makes plants green. And chlorophyll inside the chloroplasts traps the light. A stack of thylakoid membranes is called a granum, and the stroma in the background is the kind of like the cytoplasm for the chloroplast. So the stroma is the liquid background that these thylakoid membranes are floating in. Inside the chloroplast is where the glucose is made, but there are tiny holes on the bottom of the leaf that allow gas and water vapor exchange to occur. So in other words, these holes let in the carbon dioxide, water enters through the roots, and then when it's finished, it actually lets a little bit of water out, even though it doesn't produce the water, some water still escapes, and oxygen exits through those holes on the bottom of the leaf called stomata. So if you'll turn a leaf upside down, usually they're kind of microscopic and you can't see them, but every once in a while they're a little bit larger and you'll actually be able to see the holes on the bottom of a leaf with your eyes. A photon of light, a unit of light, is trapped by the chloroplasts as photosynthesis is done, and the chlorophyll pigment contains atoms that absorb the light, and the chlorophyll is the primary or major light-absorbing pigment for photosynthesis. There are some other pigments that you usually only see in the fall, like your reds and oranges and yellows and purples, but chlorophyll, the green pigment, is your number one pigment that absorbs the light. Now, chlorophyll absorbs red and violet light and reflects green light. What? Let's take a look. Please color this graph on your notes. This is the light that is absorbed by a plant. You'll notice it absorbs lots of purple and blue, absorbs very little green and yellow and orange, and absorbs a lot of red. If it absorbs the light, it pulls it in and takes it in and uses that light for photosynthesis and doesn't let it go. But if it doesn't absorb the light, it reflects it. It bounces it back out, and that's why plants are green. You can see the green light that the plant can't use, and that's what makes a plant green. Isn't that crazy? It's kind of backwards. I would have thought plants use the green light, but no, that's the one color they don't use, and they reflect it, and that's why you can see it. So from 620 to 770 nanometers of wavelength, all right, wavelength is the length of the wave, how long one wave is, and red light has the longest wavelength, and purple has the shortest wavelength. So red light is from 620 to 770 nanometers, so from about 620, a little bit before this line, up to 700 and on, it's the red light, and that light gets absorbed. Then, from 600 to 620 is orange, so from 600 to 620, I colored it orange. It's okay if you color all the way to the top. The light's there, whether it's absorbed or not. When you get to the green, notice that's the lowest line. It absorbs the least of it, so put some arrows showing that it mostly reflects the green. And then it absorbs the purple, blue, and red. So as a quick one-sentence summary, plants use the chloroplasts to make sugar by photosynthesis. Now the new part. This is cellular respiration. Then they use the mitochondria to break the sugar down and form energy by doing cellular respiration. So plants do both photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Photosynthesis is using light to make food. Cellular respiration is using food to make energy. Cellular respiration is also used by heterotrophs. Heterotrophs are also called consumers. It's anything that has to eat food instead of making its own food. So animals, fungus, one fungus, two fungi, and some bacteria must get food by eating it, not by making it. The cool thing is that photosynthesis and cellular respiration are exact opposites of each other, and the products of photosynthesis are the reactants of cellular respiration, and vice versa. So photosynthesis produces oxygen and glucose, which are then used in cellular respiration, which occurs in the mitochondria. That produces carbon dioxide and water, which are then used by photosynthesis, which happens in the chloroplast. And it just keeps going in a cycle. And as we just said, cellular respiration occurs in the mitochondria, and they use it to make energy. Let's take a closer look at a mitochondria. Remember that the mitochondria has an outer membrane, and it looks kind of like a bean, and it has an inner membrane that's all folded up. The reason it's all folded is because it gives it a lot more surface area that can be used to make a lot more energy. The equation for cellular respiration is the exact opposite of the equation for photosynthesis. So glucose, or sugar, and oxygen are used to produce energy, carbon dioxide, and water. These are your reactants, these are your products. The big idea is that both plants and animal cells use cellular respiration. All right, only plants do photosynthesis, but plants and animals use cellular respiration, because even plants have to use the energy. Both types of cells use cellular respiration as a tool to break down sugar or glucose into energy specifically ATP energy, that the body can use. Remember, plants or autotrophs can do both photosynthesis and cellular respiration because they have both chloroplasts and mitochondria, while animals, which are also called heterotrophs, can only do cellular respiration because they only have mitochondria and no chloroplasts. It turns out there are actually 3 ways that cells can make energy. First of all, there's aerobic cellular respiration, what we've just been talking about. Aerobic means with oxygen. You hear the word air in aerobic, so that's how you can remember it. And this produces carbon dioxide and water, just like we talked about, and it will make 38 ATP. Wait a minute, I thought just the other day I told you that it made 36 ATP. What's going on? Well, what happens is, yes, it does make 38, but it had to use 2 ATP to get the reaction started. So yes, 38 are produced, but if you subtract those 2, then okay, a net production of 36 ATP. When you first start to exercise, you are doing aerobic cellular respiration because you haven't run out of breath yet. You have plenty of oxygen to use, and you are making 38 ATP from the sugar. But once you get out of breath, then you have to do anaerobic respiration without oxygen. So your body does lactic acid fermentation. What happens is, when it breaks down the glucose but does not have oxygen, or maybe only has a tiny amount of oxygen, then instead of producing carbon dioxide and water, instead it will produce lactic acid. And instead of 38 ATP, you only get a piddly 2 ATP. So why bother at all? Why even do this? Well, at least you're getting 2 ATP rather than none. You've got to have energy to stay alive and keep exercising and keep breathing and thinking and everything else. So it's a good thing that you're making 2 ATP at all without oxygen. This lactic acid fermentation is done in your muscle cells. And all that lactic acid builds up in your muscles and causes soreness. And that's why you get sore after you exercise enough that you get out of breath. Eventually, the lactic acid is broken down by your liver and taken out of your body, but until then, you feel that soreness in your muscles. Animal cells will do aerobic cellular respiration or anaerobic lactic acid fermentation. Plants or yeast cells, which are a type of fungus, can either do aerobic cellular respiration, or if they run out of oxygen, they do anaerobic alcoholic fermentation. So wait a minute, if plants exercise too much, they start making alcohol? No, that's not quite it. But, for example, if the yeast gets on the inside of some bread where it can't get any oxygen, it can no longer do aerobic cellular respiration. It has to do anaerobic alcoholic fermentation. So yes, when you make bread, you're actually making a little bit of alcohol. So wait a minute, does that mean you can eat raw bread dough and get drunk? No. It produces so little alcohol that you could never get drunk on the tiny amount that it makes. However, the carbon dioxide bubbles are what causes the dough to rise and what makes your bread fluffy rather than just a flat cracker. So when there's no oxygen, it produces carbon dioxide, which causes your bread to rise. And when the bread is rising, you can smell the yeast smell and maybe a little bit of an alcohol smell. And once again, anaerobic respiration only makes 2 ATP, but 2 is better than nothing. Yeast is used to make beer, wine, and bread. And you've probably noticed that beer is carbonated. The CO2 is what causes carbonation. And so when beer is made, it actually self-carbonates. It's not like a soft drink where you have to add the CO2 and force it in there. It makes its own CO2 and carbonates itself, which is really cool. Now, when you make wine, you'll put a valve on the top that allows the carbon dioxide to burp out. So wine is not usually carbonated unless they do one final step at the end and make, say, champagne. Once again, champagne is self-carbonated. So wouldn't it be funny if humans, when they exercised, instead of doing lactic acid fermentation, what if they did alcoholic fermentation? Man, every time you exercised, you'd be drunk. Oh, wait. Maybe it's good that that doesn't happen.